Autonomic nervous system. Functions of autonomic nervous system are maintaining homeostatic conditions within the body, coordinating the body's responses to exercise and stress, assisting the endocrine system to regulate reproduction, and etc. They are involuntary and solely motor. There are three divisions of autonomic nervous system: sympathetic, parasympathetic, and enteric. Autonomic nervous system controls many organ systems with extremely rapid action. When compared, the main differences between somatic and autonomic nervous system following are noted. 1. Effectors are different. 2. Somatic NS involves only one efferent neuron while there are two efferent neurons and ganglia for ANS. 3. Conscious control required for somatic NS, while non-conscious control governs ANS. This is a MCQ point. In the somatic nervous system, neurotransmitter is released from specialized nerve endings, while the mammalian motor end plate contact the target structure. There you get one nerve terminal to one skeletal muscle fiber. In the ANS, postganglionic axons terminate in varicosities, which release the transmitter into the extracellular space surrounding the effector cells. Electrical activity is propagated via gap junctions.
Preganglionic neurons have diarycell bodies in intermediolateral gray column of spinal cord, with myelinated axons. Postganglionic neurons have their cell bodies located outside the CNS with unmyelinated axons. Preganglionic neurons have slow-conducting beta fibers, while postganglionic neurons have C fibers. The sympathetic nervous system has fight-to-flight response, while parasympathetic nervous system has rest and digest responses. Look at this diagram carefully. Sympathetic system. Sympathetic system originates in intermediolateral column of spinal cord. It consists of thoracic and lumbar regions from T1 to L2 or L3, myelinated slow-conducting beta fibers which form the white ramus communicantase, forms up the system. These are connections between spinal nerves and sympathetic chain, sympathetic trunk. They carry autonomic sympathetic fibers. Observe the chart carefully, which emphasizes difference between white and gray ramus communications. There are basically two types of sympathetic ganglions, namely, prevertebral ganglia, paravertebral ganglia. Preganglionic fibers pass all the way to organs, T1 to head, T7, 8, 9, 10, 11 to abdomen, T2 to neck, T3, 4, 5, 6 to thorax, and T12, L1, L2 to legs. Fate of postganglionic fibers. Most are unmyelinated C fibers. From either sympathetic or collateral ganglia they can pass organs along sympathetic nerves.
Parasympathetic system. Parasympathetic system. Fibers leave the CNS through cranial and sacral outflows. 75% of all PS fibers are in the vagus supplying thoracic and abdominal regions. Preganglionic fibers pass all the way to the organ to be controlled. The postganglionic neurons are located in the walls of the organ. Short postganglionic fiber leaves the neuron and supplies the organ. These are the noted parasympathetic ganglions that you should know. Ciliary ganglion from C3 supplies to ciliary muscles of eye and sphincter pupillae. Sphenopalatine ganglion from C7 supplies to lacrimal and nasal glands, while submandibular and otic ganglion supplies to submandibular and parotid glands respectively. The adrenal medulla releases adrenaline, noradrenaline, and dopamine. These substances prepare the body for the fight or flight response. Effect of sympathetic and parasympathetic systems on organs. Quickly recall the following. Detailed responses to sympathetic nervous system stimulation. Quickly recall the following. Detailed responses to parasympathetic nervous system stimulation. I. Sympathetic stimulation causes stimulation of the radial fibers and brings about dilatation of the pupil, while parasympathetic stimulation constricts the circular muscles of the iris and constricts the pupil. Focusing for near vision or accommodation is almost entirely a parasympathetic effect. Glands. Nasal, lacrimal, salivary, gastrointestinal glands are stimulated by the parasympathetic system, mainly in the upper gastrointestinal tract. In the lower gastrointestinal tract, it is mainly local factors that influence secretion. Sympathetic stimulation reduces secretion mainly through the effect on blood vessels. Sweat glands. Sympathetic stimulation causes a copious increase of sweating. But, since it also causes vasoconstriction of blood vessels, the rate of secretion of sweat is reduced. Neurotransmitter is cholinergic, adrenergic supply to palms and soles. Apocrine glands in the axillae are controlled by adrenergic fibers and controlled by sympathetic centers in the CNS. Gastrointestinal. Autonomic nerves can influence the GIT directly or via the intrinsic nerve plexuses. Parasympathetic effects will increase activity, peristalsis increases, sphincters relax, evacuation and propulsion. Also, secretion. Sympathetic effects, usually no effect. When stimulated strongly, reduce peristalsis and secretion, but increase tone. In heart. Sympathetic, increases overall activity rate and force of contraction. Parasympathetic, reduces overall activity. Parasympathetic stimulation has no effect on systemic blood vessels. Alpha receptor stimulation causes vasoconstriction, while beta receptor stimulation may sometimes cause vasodilation. Sympathetic nervous system has a hand on metabolic functions such as release of glucose from the liver, increased blood glucose, increased glycogenolysis in liver and muscle, increased muscle strength, increased BMR and increased mental activity. Sympathetic nervous system stimulates the release of adrenaline, 80%, and noradrenaline, 20%, in large amounts from adrenal medulla. Effects of these hormones last 5 to 10 times longer than during sympathetic stimulation.
Horner's syndrome.
Lesions of the sympathetic pathway to the head may cause Horner's syndrome. The deficits of function occur ipsilateral to the lesion and include partial constriction of the pupil as a result of loss of sympathetic pupillodilator action, ptosis, as a result of loss of sympathetic innervation to muscle of the eyelid, dryness of the face as a result of the lack of sympathetic activation of the facial sweat glands. Neurotransmitters. The primary neurotransmitters in ANS are acetylcholine and noradrenaline. Those fibers that secrete acetylcholine are said to be cholinergic, while those that secrete noradrenaline are said to be adrenergic.
Synthesis of acetylcholine. Acetylcholine is synthesized in the terminal endings, stored in vesicles. Once released, it is split into an acetate ion and choline, catalyzed by the enzyme acetylcholinesterase. Synthesis of noradrenaline. Synthesis begins in the axoplasm, but is completed inside the secretory vesicles. It is removed from the secretory site in 3 ways. 1. Reuptake into the adrenergic nerve endings. 2. Diffusion away from the nerve endings into the surrounding body fluids and the blood. 3. Destruction of small amounts by tissue enzymes. MAO, COMT. This slide is very important. The neurotransmitter must first bind with specific receptors on the effector cells. When the transmitter substance binds with the receptor, this causes a conformational change in the structure of the protein molecule. The altered protein molecule excites or inhibits the cell, most often by causing a change in cell membrane permeability to one or more ions, or by activating or inactivating second messenger systems. A conformational change opens or closes an ion channel, thus altering the permeability of the cell membrane to various ions. Binding of norepinephrine with its receptor on the outside of many cells increases the activity of CAMP. The CAMP in turn can initiate many different intracellular actions. There are two principal types of acetylcholine receptors: muscarinic receptors and nicotinic receptors. Muscarinic receptors are effector cells at all postganglionic cholinergic neurons. Kin are found also in sweat glands, pilomotor muscles, and skeletal muscle vasodilators. Linked to G proteins, cyclic AMP or IP3, inhibited by atropine. There are three main classes of muscarinic receptors: M1, M2, and M3. As mentioned below. Nicotinic receptors are found in all autonomic ganglia and neuromuscular junctions in skeletal muscle. There are also two major types of adrenergic receptors: 1. Alpha receptors, alpha 1 and alpha 2. 2. Beta receptors with beta 1 and 2. Noradrenaline excites mainly alpha receptors, and beta receptors only slightly. Adrenaline excites both receptors equally, but exerts a greater effect on beta 2 receptors. Therefore, greater effect is seen on cardiac stimulation. Noradrenaline causes vasodilatation, increase cardiac activity, inhibits GI functions, and cause dilatation of pupil. Adrenaline has 5 to 10 times greater metabolic effect, leading to an increase of BMR up to 100%, increased glycogenolysis, and increased release of glucose into the blood. Vasomotor tone. There is a basal sympathetic or parasympathetic tone. The sympathetic arteriolar tone keeps blood vessels half constricted. Basal secretion of A and Na from adrenal medulla is partly responsible for the tone. Autonomic reflexes coordinated in the brainstem include pupillary reaction to light, lens accommodation, salivation, tearing, swallowing, vomiting, blood pressure regulation, and cardiac rhythm modulation, respiratory rate modulation.